Hi everybody, this is a lecture for Chapter 11, which really looks at the idea of addressing organizational conflict. This is the only chapter in any of the books that we use for any of our courses that looks at conflict and conflict research. There's not enough coursework that really deals with this, how to address it, how to resolve it, that sort of thing. So I'm going to try to do my best to paint as good of a picture as I can on school conflict, and maybe it can give you a good read and idea related to conflict in schools. A lot of this comes from the business sector, which shouldn't surprise you, but it's just kind of the way that we have to approach this chapter. Principals have consistently reported that in their positions, conflict is the thing they hate the most. This can be conflict with parents, conflict with students, conflict with teachers, conflict with central administrators, anybody. It's unavoidable, but remember what we keep saying about education. Education is a humanistic profession, so people don't enjoy conflict. It's not something that makes them happy. So the key for this chapter is discussing ways to understand conflict and how to deal with it. So if we were doing this in class, I would have you do a word association. I would ask you to write down on a note card without your name what's the first word that comes to mind when you think of conflict. So just take a minute and think about that. What is the first thought that comes to your mind when you think of conflict? For me, it's avoidance. I don't like conflict. So try to write that down. So my question is, which reasons do most of your conflicts occur? Are they from lack of voice, personality clashes, unfair treatment, unfair and inadequate resources, lack of cooperation, or disagreement over work content? I would guess that your conflicts occur from one of these 6 specific things. So which party do you experience most of your conflict with in work? And this is really telling in a school district. If it's executives and managers or your direct supervising manager, then that's a leadership issue. But if it's external stakeholders, you know that can be a major problem as well. Your colleagues should be on the same team as you. The staff, meaning the regular staff, the custodial staff, transportation staff, that would bother me too. And if it's students, then it could be a management issue. So interpersonal conflict is the most common type of conflict you experience in organizations. It's when people's attitudes and behaviors are different and they create obstacles for each other. This is the most common type of conflict that occurs in schools, and it really is. I mean, this is when you talk about school-based conflict, it's normally and it's mostly interpersonal conflict. So I give you a 360-degree look at conflict, and because it's 360 degrees, really it's 3 different dimensions, because you have 90 north, 90 south, 90 south, 90 north, then you have east and west dealing with peers. Everybody has the same interest: respect, fairness, equity, and performance, but the key comes in on the rights that people have. Support is consistent on all of them, but the difference between responsibility and authority can create some issues. And when you're looking at the dichotomy between manager and subordinate, that's certainly something that you have to keep in mind. So the degrees of interpersonal conflict, I really like this. I took this from I took this from a really good article that I had in one of my classes on conflict. If there's a problem, meaning 98.6, you're calm, you have slight anxiety, you try to have a focused discussion. If there's a difference, it leads to you starting to perspire, and then you have tension, frustration, disappointment, and there's a little bit of controlled speak. Then when the confrontation hits, people are more likely to raise their voice, they're more likely to be irritable, and when the fight happens, there's anger, passive aggressiveness, withdrawal, and open hostility. Your goal is to never let anything get below the problem range. When it gets to this level, we know that's an issue, and we know that's a problem. When we hit the boiling situation, that's kind of what it is. So what do we say that you should do when you experience conflict or you see it possibly occurring? You need to deal with it early. Recognize signs, create an open problem-solving culture, communicate issues, and explore options of ways of resolution. Try to get cultural boundaries as to what's acceptable, because in some cultures, conflict is different. Asian cultures look at conflict much different than Americans. When we were over in Vietnam, if a teacher does poorly, they publicly shame them. If a student does poorly, they publicly shame them. It's just the way it is over there. And if there are boundaries, those need to be enforced, and those need to be clear to everybody as well. So in most organizations, conflict is something to be suppressed and avoided. We want organizations to run smoothly, and you should be able to control conflict when it occurs. Human relations sees conflict as a failure. If you can't achieve harmony and happiness, then obviously you did something wrong and obviously you failed. So conflict in organizations will say that. They'll say that if there's too much conflict, then it's a failure on the part of somebody within the organization. So there are two different things that can occur. There can be incompatibility of views. I think that's the one we're most used to. And then when the views are completely opposite of each other. And this is one of the things that leadership and management need to really be cognizant of and find ways to build these supports and make sure they're in place so these problems aren't just traditionally and regularly occurring. So hostility, malevolent hostility comes from the work of Owens. This says that it happens when people focus on people rather than issues, use hateful language, they maintain views regardless of new information, they use emotional terms. Funny, I was just, I took a break from recording. I'm doing a lot of these all in one fell swoop today just to get them done so we have them for class. But took a break from recording and I met another professor who happened to show up like at 7 at night, which was kind of weird. But I was telling him about my experiences at UCEA. And UCEA is the large social justice conference, but it's also the school administrator conference. And I was giving a presentation on principal autonomy. And one of the things that I said to control autonomy was to limit the authority unions have. And I had somebody who does their research, and they were very pro-teachers union, and they stood out, they mouthed off at myself and my co-presenter, and it just caused problems. So that would be an example of malevolent hostility. Think if anybody's ever done that to you at a staff meeting. What do you do? How do you handle it? And what does it make you think if somebody has the audacity to do that in a staff meeting that you're running? So it's different than attacks. Conflicts aren't as bad as attacks because conflicts can really be related to the topic at hand. Because both people might want what's best for kids and they might have different ways of expressing it. An attack is when we start actually attacking people based on who they are as a person and what they represent as a person. And we all know that that's not good. So the main thing to realize in education is conflict really is based on resources. And I talk about this in my finance class too. All stakeholders have different views as to how schools are going to look. You have to deal with this every time there's an expenditure because what I think is important is different than what you think is important. Think about what we were talking about in class. In my building, if I had to rank, prioritize what I think the most important stuff is, I'm actually going to put math above English. I know other people aren't, and the brick book really shows you why you put math above English, but some of you aren't. You're going to put English above math. So we might have a conflict if there was an expenditure issue over that. In the district, it's normally parents and community members through school board meetings. They'll express their views, they'll go to the board meeting because they think their voice can be heard. And a lot of people are on the school board for reasons more or less that they just want power. So if you know that and you go into it thinking that, I think that's important. So the first thing that happens is withdrawal through indifference, meaning you just have apathy for the system. I know how that feels. I've worked in places where I have complete and total apathy and my motivation and my care just is gone. But it can impact the functioning of the organization because I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do and I'm not supporting the organization in the way that it's supposed to be supported. Sometimes too, there are hostile or aggressive behaviors. And the other thing that the book says is, there's conflict going on, there's minor theft of property. In my finance class, they always talk about the building secretary being the person that manages supplies. Anybody have an opinion on that? I mean, try to think about it. Do you want the building principal to be the one person that is actually managing supplies? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What's your opinions on that? I always say in a finance class that, building secretary can manage it, but the principal needs to keep their eye on whoever that is, just in case. So 5 different views and frameworks exist for conflict. We're going to go over each one of them, and I'll do a brief overview of them if this is something that you're interested in. So the hostility view is that many people don't like conflict and they avoid it when they can. They'll deny and avoid it. Good leaders need to gauge when conflict could arise and intervene. If you see something's getting contentious, or there's going to be an issue maybe related to scheduling or assigning duties, you as the building principal need to realize when you step in. I always find that the other time that this happens too is when you have different egos and department chairs that are involved in things. That can cause a serious issue as well. So try to think about that and see what that would do for conflict. So, hostility, one of the things that they give you 3 examples of them. Let's talk about ways this would look at school. One of them would be, budget allocations are assigned for teaching positions, reduced space or facilities, because you have to protect the budget, and then the class size grows, and you don't have a choice and you can't fix it. When one party seeks to control the activities belonging to another unit, those are my classes, that's my department. I told all of you that I wrote the state standards for teaching law as a business course, not as a social studies course, but there were a lot of social studies teachers that tried to protect turf on that. 2 parties in the organization must work together, and when they can't agree to do so, then it's 2 people that have different goals. As long as it's on topic, this isn't a bad thing. So try to think about that as actually one of the better things. If that happens, that means that people are thinking and their motivation is to do right by kids. So contingency views of conflict says you need to diagnose what's happening and why there's conflict. The parties might have incompatible goals. There could be a miscommunication. If there is, you need to select a method of dealing with it from the options that are available. If you're looking at conflict research and conflict management research, the idea in the property is called win-win, and the author of that is Stephen Covey. He wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of his main theories was this notion of what think win-win looks like. So the process view of conflict, first somebody does what the other party wants to do. Then they satisfy their own concerns. So then there's going to be escalation or de-escalation because they had to do what they thought was right and they had to make the other person happy, which could lead to frustration, hostility, or trust. And that becomes long-term effects on things as well. So you have to be careful for that because in process conflict-oriented people are actually going to want to fulfill the other party's concerns first, and then they'll worry about kind of what that looks like. So the structural view of conflict, this is really, does the organization cause conflict because somebody doesn't follow rules and procedures? So does somebody stand up for what they believe in? Do they not rock the boat? Was it a matter of them being ignorant? And I don't mean ignorant in the wrong way. Were they ignorant to what they were supposed to know? One thing that the book mentions that I like is put as little communication in writing as possible unless it's something that you're completely sure of. I agree with that. I think that's a good idea, and that's a safe view for almost everybody. So schools are open systems. We've already gone over that. Classrooms are closed systems, but schools are open systems, meaning that they interact with their environments. That means that external problems can cause internal issues in schools. So if there are lack of resources, you can avoid coercion. There's opportunities for compliance. People will either use resistance, escape, compliance, or passive resistance. When you coerce somebody, that can work initially, but then it can create long-term hostility, which is a bad thing. So when you have conflict, everybody wants a win. When you have a winner, the other party has to lose. So when you manage conflicts, you need to try to see that there's ways so that both parties have a chance to be successful, or even if both parties can't win per se, both parties at least have their voice heard, have their opinions heard, and somebody's at least going to understand the decision you make as a district leader. So win-lose is common, and I know it's a bad thing it even sounds like because we say win-lose, but it's sometimes one fails at the other's success. Teachers have to win, so they have a complete winning mentality. So it's difficult to do this, but as a principal or district leader, one of the things that you need to do is really reassure teachers that the decisions they're making and what they're doing are in the best interest of kids. And if you can somehow frame it and relate it back to this is going to help the students in our building, because if the people really are passionate about education, they'll get it, but if they're not, then you have a conflict again. So one of the things that you have to do is you have to determine if there actually really is a conflict. If you have a third party that's involved who can actually see if there's a problem and manage the issue, that can really, really help the situation. And then it also allows the blame not to be placed on you as the administrator. Because then they're doing the management of it and they're not blaming you. So, I mean, it's something that you have to consider. If you want to put that on your shoulders, that's great, but it's definitely not something that you have to do. So every party has interpreted conflict in their own way. We're going to look at the 5 orientations of conflict, and we'll look at each element of these, and it might help you if you're doing research on, a new system and pushback from teachers and staff. So we're going to look at competitive, avoidant, accommodation, sharing, and collaborative. So competitive nature is uncooperative and high in high assertiveness. One party will dominate the other. The idea is that one person has to win and another person has to lose. And that's common, and that happens. That creates a competitive environment, and you have to keep that in mind. Avoidant is uncooperative and unassertive. This is usually expressed by apathy, withdrawal, and indifference. It doesn't mean the conflict doesn't exist. It just means that people are trying to get away from it. Where you have a problem with an avoidant, neglectful conflict situation is when the person explodes. And everybody explodes at least once in their life. But when that happens, you have to be able to control it, and that can create challenges as well for you. So appeasement is high cooperative and unassertive. This means that somebody just does whatever the other person wants, and they'll neglect their own. So this may be associated, with the person says, I just want to keep working here. I just want to keep making everybody happy. And if I have to, I'll sacrifice my own interest just to make sure that everybody stays happy. And yes, I've worked for bosses like this, and I find that this is really an elementary school mentality as well. There's a lot of appeasement that goes on. So sharing is when you have assertiveness and cooperative, when you have trade-offs. But I need to stress this. The research says that most people, will want to win, and eventually someone will lose. Even if you try to share in the beginning, there's still going to be somebody who dominates, there's still going to be somebody who's the winner, and there's still inevitably going to be somebody who's the loser. So you have to keep that in mind, and when you're thinking about conflict, it's certainly an approach that you need to take. So collaborative is high cooperative and high assertive. And the best way to explain this is really, the concept of win-win. And of course, we have to stop, collaborate, and listen when that occurs. We want to try to satisfy the effort and concerns of all, really, and make sure that everybody leaves happy and with a smile on their face. Once again, much easier said than done. So, dealing with difficult people, there are plenty of books that goes with this, but you have difficult people in every organization, and you also have difficult people in every organization that, unfortunately, as life would have it, they're in that organization, and as much as you would like to get rid of them, they cannot be eliminated. We work with people. This is a human industry. Dealing with difficult teachers it comes from Todd Whitaker. If I was doing a human resources course here, this would be one of the books that I would use. It would be my auxiliary text, and it would be the one that we would use for the main part of course. So, what are the ideas on dealing with difficult teachers? Try to give them opportunities for positive behaviors and reinforce them in front of others. Makes them feel good. If they're having problems communicating with others, then you need to show them how they come across to others. If nothing else works out, after you've approached them, you've tried to help, try to show them that negative behaviors are not acceptable. In that they create a poor school climate, which, as we all know, when you look at where poor school climate is, it's normally in the teacher's lounge or during staff meetings, that's why you have to have strong rules set down for your staff meetings and what they look like, what you expect them to do. So, stress happens after you have conflict. So, how can you reduce the tensions and stress? You can address the technical aspects of the problem. You can try to have a structure for the problem-solving process, meaning when conflict does occur, people know who to go to, people know who to talk to, and they know what to say. If it's a tough decision, you as the principal, you need to claim responsibility for it. If you can stop the work avoidance mechanism, that can help, or you can actually tell people to take a little bit of time off. And if the job is just being too challenging for people, try to slow it down. So that's it. I do want to stress that, in any job, in any organization, especially as a superintendent, you will deal with conflict almost daily. Your goal, if you can prevent it from manifesting in the beginning, it's going to make you better in your position and provide a better opportunity in helping you advance in your leadership. Thank you.